about cockroaches and birds. Earlier we studied about the earthworm and the snails and how about their body components, body parts, and also how do they locomote. So now we'll be studying about the cockroaches. Now cockroaches, I'm sure we've seen cockroaches everywhere in your house bathrooms or either on walking on streets or in the sewages. Cockroaches are one organism that are present everywhere, so we are quite familiar with their structure, but still I'll give you a brief of it. So cockroaches have 3 pairs of legs, that means 3 legs on one side and the 3 set on the other. Then the outer body, that is the brownish hard outer skeleton, is made up of the different units of muscles that are joined together to form, and it is really hard and compact in the structure. So the next point would be that they have 2 pairs of wings that are attached to the breast muscles, and these wings, they help them to take flight and fly. So the first set of the wings is known as the forewing, while the second set of wings are known as the hind wings. So the whole body of the cockroach is made up of distinct set of muscles. Like the muscles present in the wings would be different set, while the muscles present in the legs would be made up of a different set of muscles. So the breast muscles move the wings when they fly. Now obviously when the wings are connected to the breast muscles would contract, which would further lead to the movement, by which the outcome would be voluntarily flying. Now let's move to the next organism, next animal, that is birds. Now birds, we know, are vertebrates, and vertebrates means that they have a spinal cord, just like we humans do. So the birds can fly because of their bodies, because their bodies are well suited to fly. They are adapted to the functioning of flying. That is why birds can perform this activity with ease. Now their bones are hollow and light. The bones that is responsible for flying, that is present in the forelimb, are hollow and are light, and because of which they can perform this function of flying very easily. Now we humans, we cannot fly because of our hands. Supposedly our hands are the forelimbs and our legs are the hind limbs. Do you think we can fly? Probably we cannot fly because our bones are of high density, while the birds have the bones that are of low and hollow and are very light, and they have air sacs present in their forelimb, due to which it helps them to take flight. So the bones of the hind limbs are typically used for walking and perching, and as I told you, there are certain birds who can walk on the ground, certain can swim, certain can fly. So the examples for the birds that could walk on the ground would be the ostrich and the peacock. You rarely see these birds flying. The next one that can swim and walk as well on the floor would be the ducks and the swans, and the ones that can fly are eagles. Eagles can fly to a very high point, and also the pigeons and crows. These are the crows and pigeons are the birds you actually see near your lawn or in the gardens or anywhere. So the next point that helps these birds to fly would be that they have these bony parts of the forelimbs which are modified to fly. Now the shoulder bones are strong and the breast bones are modified in a way that these forelimbs are connected to them, and they can take flight easily. And this is due to the muscles that's known as the muscle of flight, and because of this they can fly and sustain in air for long. Now let's proceed with our next animal, that would be an aquatic species, and it is the fish. So the next aquatic species we'll be talking about is the fish. Now we know that fishes are vertebrates. That means they have the vertebral column in them that gives them the support to the body and gives them protection. So now let's just talk about the structure of a fish. I'm sure when you go to the fish market with your parents, you have observed fishes. So how do you observe, how do you see them, how did you notice them at that time? Weren't their bodies tapered in the beginning to the end, weren't their heads and tails smaller compared to the rest of the body? So that body structure is nothing but the streamlined body structure. Now this streamlined body structure helps the fish to cut the currents in the water and move in the forward direction. So the streamlined body is nothing but when the head and the tail of a fish are smaller than the middle portion of the body, that is, the body tapers towards the end. Now tapering is nothing but the same thing that I told you, that the head is small and the tail is small, while the middle portion of the body is a little bit broader. The shape of the fish is such that water can flow around it easily and allow the movement of fish in water. That's the main purpose of this shape. So the next point for fish would be that skeleton of the fish is covered using a strong muscles around it. Now I had explained to you in the example of taking us, that is the human beings, and the skeleton of the human being being covered by the muscles around it. So why were these muscles covered around us? Do you remember I told you that these muscles are covered in order to provide the human skeleton shape, support, give them cushioning, act as an incubator. Incubator or insulator are nothing but it is a phenomena where the temperature, the inner temperature of the body is not allowed to be revealed to the outer atmosphere. In this way, the temperature of the body is maintained and other functions of the body can be performed well. So the same thing is in the case of fish, because fish has muscles that are cushioning it and covering it. The temperature of the fish in the inside body is maintained, and because of which they can perform their regular functionings. The next point for this would be that during swimming, muscles make the front part of the body to curve to one side and the tail part to swing to the opposite side. Now I've drawn a small diagram over here. As I told, now I'll tell you about the streamlined shape also. So this is the shape of a fish. Do you see the head is smaller and the tail is smaller while the rest of the body is huger? That's the streamlined body shape. Now what happens when the fish needs to move in water? What does it do? That it shifts his head to one side in the direction of water and the tail swaps to the other side. Now when it performs a series of these movements like I've drawn over here, that in the first image the head was to one side and the tail was to opposite side. In the next image, what happened was that the tail was swapped to the opposite side and the head was to the other side that it was eventually present. And followingly, a series of this swapping of head and the tail to the opposite side and the body forming a curve was performed, which finally led to the movement of fish in water, and it helped it in moving in the fourth direction. So the fish forms a curve, as I just told you right now. This is the curve that's formed by the fish while it is performing that function. So the body and the tail quickly curves to the other side. That I again explained to you over here, that in the first initial stage when it was in the water, its head was to one side and the tail was to the other. So continuous swapping of the head and the tail led to the motion by the formation of a curve, and a series of such jerks or curves that are produced by the fish help the fish to perform the movement in water. Now I'll just explain it to you once more for you to summarize it in your brains. So what is fish? A fish, the shape of the fish. A fish is nothing but an aquatic species that has streamlined body. The streamlined body is nothing but it has head and tail that is smaller compared to the rest of the portion of the body, and in short, in other words, that it has a very tapering body. The next one is that its shape is such that water can flow around it easily and allow its movement in the water. The skeleton of the fish is covered using strong muscles. Strong muscles, why? strong muscles for providing it cushioning, strong muscles for maintaining the body temperature, strong muscles for giving support to the framework, that is the skeleton. So during swimming, muscles make the front part of the body. I'll explain to you over here. So during swimming, when the fish is swimming, the muscles, they make the head part to tilt to one side and the tail part to shift to the opposite side. Then after the fish performing this, a curve is formed in its body. This is the curve. Because of this curve, the fish is able to swap its tail, cut the currents and move in the forward direction, thus performing the movement. So a series of these swapping and shifting the head and tail to the opposite side would finally lead to the movement of fish in water, which is actually performed by the fish cutting the currents in the water.
No more spending your energy and money on coaching classes or missing classes for rain, for rally and any other nonsense. Subjects covered by multiple teachers with repeat telecasts. Doubts, concepts, applications, no problem. All explained through great and significant animation. So sit back comfortably in your home and watch Study Spectrum TV channel.
Proceed with the other animal, that is a reptile. Now reptile is nothing but the one animal that slides and glides on the floor. So the next one that we have is a snake. Now snake, do not get confused for the fact that I explained to you about the earthworm and now I'm explaining you about the snake. So both of them have long and tubular bodies, so both of them do not have a spinal cord in it. So as I told you that the earthworm did not have spinal cord or was not vertebrate, but over here snake is a vertebrate animal. That means it has a proper intact spinal cord. A spinal cord, I told you, it is a long extended bone made up of many small bones connected by many joints. These joints were nothing but the gliding joints in it. So the next point about the snake's structure would be that the snake's structure, after being a vertebrate organism, it is thin. It is made up of thin muscles. It is that are connected to each other. Though these muscles will be connected to each other, they will be even connected at the distant end of the body. So the body curves to form many loops. Now, as I told you in the case of earthworm, that the earthworm had rings on its body, rings present all over the cross area of its body. So similarly, in the case of snakes, there are loops present, and the movement that are performed in the snake are with the help of these loops. And actually, when you just turn around the snake and see its lower part, you would see the skin to be soft, smooth and having many loops that are circles present on the whole of its body. So the muscles that interconnect the backbone, the ribs and skins are these thin muscles. These thin muscles are present, as I told you, all over the body of the snake, and they connect the distant parts also, the distant organs also. The movement of the snake is because of loops, and it is also known as looping. The curve that it performs while moving to and fro from side to side is known as looping. But the movement is generally called slithering, and it is not in a straight line. We have seen, you might have seen a snake move in the Discovery Channel TV, and you might have observed the snake to be moving in the curvy and zigzaggy manner. So that is known as slithering, and that zigzaggy manner is performed in the snake because of the loops that are present, and that is known as looping. Now what happens is that when these loops are present, they contract from one side and are relaxed onto the other side. So the place where these loops would be contracted, a curve would be formed there, and simultaneously this happens throughout the whole of the body, just like I explained you in the example of fish, but the fish was a streamlined body. So because of this constant movements, because of this series of this looping, the movement is performed in the snake. So the movement of snake is not as simple as it seems to be. So as I told you, the movement in the human beings is also not that easy as it seems to be. The movement in the snake involves a large number of bones and muscles, and that help the body to move in the forward direction. So let's just repeat this once again. So what we learned from this was that snakes are vertebrates. That means they have a spinal cord with them, and they have thin muscles present all over their body. These thin muscles are connected even to the distant part of the body, and they interconnect the backbone, the ribs and the skin. So the body curves to form many loops, and this is nothing but it's also known as the looping. The next more thing we learned was that the movement of snake is also known as slithering, and it is not in the straight line. That means it moves in a very zigzaggy manner. So the last point that we learned was that the large number of bones and muscles are associated in the movement of a snake. So I hope that the gates of animal is clear enough to you. Before we go to any other point, let's just summarize the whole lesson that we learned. So we started with learning about the difference in movement and locomotion. So our very first objective, I hope you remember that I explained to you about the objectives. So the very first objective of this lesson was to understand the difference in movement and locomotion. I will just summarize what is movement. Movement is change in the position of any object. So movements are usually performed voluntarily and involuntarily. Voluntarily movements are the ones that we perform with us being in consciousness or with us being aware of performing that movement. Like right now I'm talking to you, this movement I'm performing being aware. So that one movement is a voluntary movement. The next one is the involuntary movement. Now involuntary movements are the movements which are performed even if you are not knowing about it, even if you are not aware about it, like the blinking of your eye, you breathing, your heart beating. These are certain involuntary movements that cannot be controlled by you. And the next point we'd go to is the locomotion. Now how would you define locomotion? Locomotion may be defined as the change in the position of an whole organism from one place to another. So locomotion is a phenomena because of which we perform activities like running, writing, walking, jogging in humans, or even in animals actually. Animals for running and walking. Then we went further to understand about the framework of our body, that's the skeleton. Now we understood that the framework is important for our body, for providing our body support, for providing our body shape and rigidity, for protecting our body, for helping us perform movements, and also to help us in the production of the blood cells and the regulation of various hormones. Now why blood cells? Because I explained to you, I hope you remember that I explained to you that in between the radius and the ulna we have the bone marrow in the spleen where the blood is produced, new blood cells are produced and old blood cells are brought there, and they exhaust over the while, actually they die, because every living organism has a valid time to perform functions and stay alive. So in this way, when blood cells have the same function. Then we went further to learn about the different components of the skeleton. In that we learned about skull, we learned in skull that skull is divided into two parts, and that's the cranium and the mandible. The cranium is the upper jaw bone and the mandible is the lower jaw bone. I also explained to you that cranium was made up of fixed joints. These joints were the ones that could not move, while the mandible was movable and was made up of the movable joints, and it could hold the teeth intact, and it connected the cranium to the mandible. The next we learned was about the rib cage. In rib cage, we learned that there are 24 pairs of ribs, and these ribs, they connect the sternum, that is the chest, to the backbone that's present on your back. Now, I also asked you to feel the structure by touching your rib bones, because you can feel those bones. Then we learned that this whole structure of your ribs being attached to the sternum, that is the chest bone, and to your backbone was known as the rib cage or the thoracic cage. Then we move forward to learn a little bit more about the spinal cord. I explained to you in that the spinal cord connected your neck to your pelvic girdle and your buttocks, and in that the whole of the spinal cord extended right from your and it connected your brain to the rest of your body, and that made up your CNS, that is the central nervous system. Now talking about the bone structure of the spine. The bony structure of spine had around 31 small bones present in it. So the first area was known as the lumbar region. I hope you remember that I explained to you about the diagram by labeling it. So the first few bones are known as the cervical region. The next one is known as the thoracic region, because the thoracic region of the backbone connects your spine to your chest with the help of rib bones, and that's known as the rib cage or the thoracic cage. So a little below we go, so we find the lumbar region, and the small part of the backbone is known as the sacral region. So from this we also learned that the spinal cord was a very thin tubular connective tissue made up of nerve fiber, and this was very sensitive and protected with the help of CSF, that is the cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid, I told you that it was straw in color, it was very liquidy in texture, and it was present in all over the whole of the backbone. So now I also told you that the backbone, since it was made up of small bones, it was really flexible and it had many joints present in it. Those joints were like the gliding joints. Now I also explained to you about the gliding joints, that these gliding joints are present over one another, they are stacked over one another, and they are seen in the example of backbone, like 31 bones are stacked over one another and they slide over one another to make the body movements more flexible. Then we learned about the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle. I explained to you that the shoulder girdle was connected to your chest bones, to your chest cavity, and it fitted in your clavicle, that is your shoulder bone, because of the ball in the socket joint. Now I explained to you that ball in the socket joint is the joint in which one bone will have a rounded end, while the first rounded bone would fit into the cavity of the other bone, and this is nothing but the shoulder as the shoulder girdle. Now let's move on to the pelvic girdle. I explained to you that pelvic girdle was present in the lower part of your body, and it connected the tibia, fibula and femur. I hope you remember about tibia, fibula, femur. I told you that fibula and tibia were the bones that are present in your foreleg, and that are the two bones that are present. So one of the longest bone was tibia, while the other shorter bone of the two bones was fibula. Whereas femur was the upper was the upper thigh bone, and this was highest in density and the strongest bone of the whole body, because it has to take the weight of the whole body. So now talking about the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle also holds the backbone. It is connected to the pelvic girdle, and pelvic girdle, it consists of the body organs that are present below the stomach or the lower abdomen, and it helps in perform the functions of sitting. I also explained to you about the fingers, how fingers were so flexibly and easily moving. I explained to you that right from the wrist to the start of your fingers, this area was known as the metacarpals, while the ones that you see over here and can be moved easily, these are nothing but the carpals, and these are made up of joints. That's the hinge joint. I also explained to you about the feet. The feet, right from the place where the bone ends, that is the tibia and fibula, that joint, that place is known as the tarsals. And followingly, as we proceed further, the bones that have the whole of the feet intact were the metacarpals. Following to the fingers had phalanges. Then we move further to talk about how could we guess the bone structure. So I explained to you about the X-rays, and that X-rays were the rays that were low in density and couldn't cross your bones, and thus leave an impression on the negative paper, the photocopy that was there to produce the image.
No more spending your energy and money on coaching classes, or missing classes for rain, for rally, and any other nonsense. Subjects covered by multiple teachers with repeat telecasts. Doubts, concepts, applications, no problem. All explained through great and significant animation. So sit back comfortably in your home and watch Study Spectrum TV channel.
This question in our brain that fine, we understood about the skeletal system, but how does the body move so freely and so easily? Now that is because of the help of joints. We learned that joints were nothing but two bones that were connected to each other with the help of bones and muscles to make movement more easier. So we learned about the joints, that there were two main type of joints, that were the fixed joints and the movable joints. Now the fixed joints can also be known as the immovable joints, since the name suggests that these joints cannot move. I also explained to you in the column of fixed joints that cranium is one example, because it holds the skull together to protect the brain. Since brain is a very sensitive organ of the body, and it controls all the voluntarily and involuntarily activities of the body. Then let's move on to the movable joint section. Now in movable joint section, we came to know that there are four more types of joints. The first joint was a ball in the socket joint, and that I explained to you while explaining to you about the shoulder girdle, but I'll still repeat it for you to be thorough with it. The ball in the socket joint is a joint in which there is one bone that is having a rounded end that fits into the cavity of the other bone, right, in the example of shoulder girdle. And this ball in the socket joint helps the bone and the body to perform activities in 360 degrees. Now you can rotate your arm completely. So that is the plane in which the bones move in a plane of 360 degrees. The next we learned was about the hinge joint. Now hinge joint, I asked you to compare it with the door. Since your door has a hinge that is present on the side of it, and this helps the door to open and to close really smoothly. So hinge joint had the same functions of performing movements in a planar region. Planar region, by that I mean to perform the movements at 180 degree. This is planar, this is 180. So the next one that we learned was about the pivot joint. Now, but before telling you about the pivot joint, let me tell you the example of the hinge joint. These hinge joints are found mainly in the elbow and the knees. So these hinge joints, they also help you to perform actions like flexion and extension. Now I explained to you that flexion is when from your joint the two bones have a acute angle. So this movement is flexion. Now extension would be when the angle from your joint between the two bones is more than 90. Let's move on to the next joint, that is the pivot joint. The pivot joint had been seen in the neck. So this just helps you to perform movement from side to side or from up to down. And the last one, that is the gliding joint. The gliding joint was seen in the wrist and the backbone. Now this gliding joint is actually, I explained it to you in the example of backbone also, that the backbone is stacked onto each other and it slides with the help of these joints. It makes it more flexible. So further we learned about the movement in plants. Since we know that plants cannot locomote, we learned that plants can perform movements like geotropism and phototropism. Phototropism was nothing but the movement of plants towards the sunlight. That means the growth of the shoot towards the sunlight or tilting of the shoot towards the sunlight. I explained it to you with the help of an example in which you had to keep the plant in half shaded area and just allow a little rays, few of the rays to reach the plant. You would notice that the plant is shifting and tilting towards the movement, towards the sunlight. Then we learned about geotropism. Geotropism is nothing but the movement of the plants, that is, to be more specific, that is the root of the plants towards the ground. So this geotropism helps in uptake of water, minerals and other ions that are necessary for the plants to produce food for it. Now we also learned about the movement of animals. In that we learned that the movement of animals involving earthworm, snails, then we learned about snakes, then we learned about birds.